Good evening. I'm delighted to be here this evening to talk to you about some of the work I've been doing with the Royal Academy of Engineering. My name is David Jenkins, and I've been leading the work done through the Royal Academy of Engineering in developing a series of inclusive team working modules that have helped promote a more inclusive culture within engineering. As you'll see, I'm a client director within the Atkins business, where I've been leading on ED&I for the last 4 or 5 years, responsible for our UK and Europe strategy and plan, and that embraces around 10,000 or so staff. So moving on, what am I going to cover this evening? Well, this evening I'm going to be looking at summarising the findings and recommendations of the 2017 report produced by the Academy on creating cultures where all engineers thrive. I chaired the action group that delivered that and steered the project from which it was the output. I'm then going to go on and describe how we took one of the recommendations from the report and through an action group turned it into a series of development modules on inclusive team working, and then talk in a bit more detail about the content of each of the modules and give you a taste of what they contain. And hopefully by the end, you will share my enthusiasm and will be keen to make use of the modules in your own organisations when they're launched officially next month as part of National Inclusion Week. So the report, as I've already mentioned, was the output from a comprehensive study of diversity and inclusion within the engineering profession. It involved, amongst other things, a detailed literature search, a survey of approaching 7,000 people working in engineering, and then a number of focus groups. But rather than me telling you about it, let's watch this short video that summarises the findings of the study.
At the Royal Academy of Engineering, we have a vision of an inclusive engineering profession that attracts, recruits and retains engineers from diverse backgrounds. By diverse, we mean people with different genders, ethnicities, abilities, ages, sexual orientation, religions and beliefs. By inclusive, we mean developing cultures, environments, processes and behaviours that allow all engineers to thrive. To create inclusiveness, we must first look at the current culture of engineering to see where we need to improve. We asked 7,000 engineers across all backgrounds what they thought. We found 9 common themes in their answers that describe the culture of engineering in the UK. Some of these are positive: problem-solving, safety-conscious, proud, loyal, team-oriented, with flexibility in where and when they work. But 3 themes in our culture can make it feel less inclusive. Some describe the culture of engineering as friendly but impersonal, as having a strong attachment to tradition, and as providing a lack of support and clarity on career development. We also found that female and ethnic minority engineers experience the culture as less inclusive than the majority male and white engineers do. All engineers agreed that inclusion is a good thing, with personal benefits such as increased motivation, performance and commitment to their organisations. There are benefits for organisations too. Engineers who feel more included are more likely to speak up about safety concerns and to see a future for themselves in engineering. So what can we do to create a more inclusive culture? Engineers feel more included when they experience openness, respect, relationships, career development support, flexibility, leadership and diversity. We've come up with 7 recommendations to make this happen. We must prioritise action on inclusion so that all engineers can see that it is something they should care about, not just women and minority groups. We must talk about the benefits of a more inclusive engineering culture in ways that inspire everyone. We must build a diverse network of allies, which includes white male engineers, to lead action on inclusion. We must increase awareness of how different groups experience culture and inclusion in engineering. We must use the strengths of engineering culture like problem solving and collaborative working to drive progress. We must ensure fair and equal access to career support and talent management for all, because inclusion is for everyone, not just underrepresented groups. Together we can create a more inclusive future where all engineers thrive.
Welcome back, and hopefully you found that a really good summary of what was contained in the report. You see, overall it provided really useful data for us on how included the different communities felt, allowing us to analyse both by a number of the protected characteristics and by the demographics of age and engineering sector. However, and really importantly, allowing us to identify the actions we'd need to take in response. And the study also helped us to understand what was unique about an engineering culture. What was unique about diversity and inclusion within an engineering context? And what did inclusivity mean for the participants? You'll see on the diagram here, this sort of circular diagram, the work helped to identify 7 indicators of inclusion and how these are experienced by different groups and by those individuals who took part in the study. The first is about openness, the extent to which engineers feel able to be open about who they are and about their life outside of work, and how confident they are to speak up on inappropriate behaviours towards themselves or towards other people, or about mistakes, or about safety risks. The second indicator is that of respect, and this is the extent to which engineers feel treated with respect by managers, leaders and colleagues, and don't feel that assumptions are being made about them because of their gender, ethnicity, or any other difference. The third indicator is that of relationships, how engineers relate to each other, and the extent to which those relationships are friendly, collaborative, and free of offensive banter, bullying, or harassment. Then we come to career, the extent to which engineers feel supported in their careers, by their manager, and by the fair implementation of talent management processes, such as promotion. The fifth indicator is that of flexibility, and this is the extent by which engineers have opportunities to work flexibly without it being any form of barrier to their career progression. Penultimate trait is that of leadership, and this is the extent to which engineers are convinced by their manager's commitment and action on diversity and inclusion. And last but certainly not least, diversity itself. Over half of the engineers surveyed put a diverse workforce at all levels as evidence of inclusion. An inclusive culture promotes greater diversity. I'm not going to go into detail on this slide, which is taken indeed from the first module of the inclusive team working. But an inclusive culture does improve motivation, performance, staff engagement, safety, innovation, customer focus and collaboration. That's what our research showed. And indeed, why wouldn't all individuals and businesses want a more inclusive culture? It makes absolute business sense to me, as well as being the right thing to do. But if engineering is to become more inclusive, we must recognise that there are barriers that will get in the way. And the report helped to identify these too. Inclusion privilege means that those who are already feel included are the least likely to take action. This indeed has been highlighted in recent months with Black Lives Matter and discussions around white privilege, what this means and how the white majority need to get engaged in anti-racism if lasting progress is to be made. The report also identified the perception that there is no crisis of inclusion that would help kickstart and energise the changes needed. Where is the burning platform that makes this a priority in our businesses today? And finally, engineering is all about tangible and quantifiable outputs, solving problems, whereas developing an inclusive culture It's more intangible. It's more about perceptions and experiences. So actually, does the engineering culture in some ways impede the desire for a more inclusive culture? The video earlier summarised the recommendations of the report. There were a number. And these were assessed by the Royal Academy, and 2 were identified and considered would deliver the most benefits and would be taken forward as 2 standalone projects. The first was around what the report identified as the importance of mobilising a critical mass of white and male engineers to become allies for building an inclusive culture. This thinking developed to focus on those in the majority becoming allies. We're hearing more about that in the second presentation, so I'll say no more about that now. And now we come to the second project, which is what the rest of this presentation will focus on. And this was about leveraging the culture of engineering. And in choosing this, the Academy wanted to focus on a project that would be specific to inclusion in engineering, and not simply something generic on inclusion. So what better than to focus on the characteristics of an engineering culture and to build a toolkit or intervention that builds on these traits. Now, there's quite a lot here on this slide. Indeed, it shows 9 characteristics of the engineering culture as identified by the study. The 6 in blue are all positive traits, and are the ones that I certainly recognise from my 34 years in the industry. We love to solve problems. Safety is a core value for most engineering companies. We're proud when we design or create a piece of engineering. We tend to be intensely loyal. We work in teams most of the time, recognising that we don't have all the answers on our own. And finally, we need to be flexible if we're going to find new solutions. Those are the traits in blue, but there are 3 traits of the culture that can get in the way of being more inclusive, and these are highlighted in green. Engineers, whilst being friendly, are often not that personal. Indeed, many are introverts, content with keeping themselves to themselves. The second potential barrier is that there is a strong attachment to tradition. And potentially that makes us less open to new ways of working. And finally, whilst engineers typically enjoy their work, they are unclear and less happy about support for their career progression and feel forced into management roles if they want to progress. So that was what was decided we were going to focus on as an action group. And you can see here the range of companies across different engineering sectors involved in the work that we developed. And in addition to people from these companies, we had a number of representatives from the Academy itself. And my role was to chair this group. After generating loads of ideas of what we could develop and a number of meetings where we weighed up the different concepts, we decided to develop a suite of training interventions or of learning interventions for teams working in an engineering environment that would help them to work together in a more inclusive way. And here are the 4 modules we settled on. Each 1 hour in duration, but with optional extension material. They build on the characteristics of the engineering culture and the indicators of inclusion that I've already described. And shortly, I'll go into each one in a bit more detail. But above all, they focus on real teams and can be used with functional or project teams, whether they've been recently formed or have been long established. And the great news is they'll be free to download and use. So what features make these learning modules unique and make me, for one, excited about their upcoming launch? Well, firstly, they've been developed by members of the action group and have undergone peer review within the team. They've been trialled and piloted, and we've received really positive feedback from delegates who have attended those pilot studies. I think the other feature is they're really flexible in how they can be used. So they can be used as 4 standalone modules, part of a series, part of a day's training event. And importantly, they don't need a training expert to deliver. They are written so they could be used by the team leader with just some minor adaptation to put it in the context of the particular project or company they're being delivered to. This is a key feature of them. And that's supported by really good material by way of guidance. They're highly interactive. They use a variety of learning techniques. It is not death by PowerPoint, I can assure you of that. They'll be free to use. All we ask is that if you use them, you provide feedback to the Academy, and there's a mechanism for doing that. And finally, and really important in these days, they can be used virtually. Indeed, we spent the last few weeks adapting them for this purpose. So let me come on now to take you on a whistle-stop tour of the modules. So the first one, why is diversity and inclusion important? This module sets the scene for the series, and we do recommend it is held first. So each module has a guide, and in this picture is the image on the left. And that guide is there to provide the team leader with comprehensive instructions on how to run the sessions. The guidance covers the preparation and planning of the workshop, its delivery itself, and then how to provide feedback. As shown here, each guide provides a timed outline of the session, and for each section provides the detail as shown, namely the purpose of each section, what the outcomes for the delegate should be from that section of the module, what you need to do as a facilitator, in other words, how you run the session, or that section in particular, and finally, what you need to say. So what is the content that you need to get across? All the accompanying presentational material is provided, and to promote interaction, there are only, as I've said already, a limited number of PowerPoint slides. Perhaps a bit unlike today's session. So as an example, here's a slide from the module that is used to promote a discussion on diversity characteristics, whether they be protected or not, whether visible or not. Its purpose is to help delegates understand what is meant by diversity. This discussion is weaved in with exploring the 7 indicators or facts of inclusion that I've already talked about to help everyone understand the links between diversity and inclusion. And they then follow some specific input to ensure delegates understand the protected characteristics and the related legislation. And here, in fact, is the final slide of that session that summarises at the end of the module and reminds those attending of the key messages, and in turn sets up the remaining 3 modules. It should help get all the team members up to the same level of understanding of the topic, and most importantly, eager to attend the next 3 sessions. So that's module 1. Let's just see why diversity and inclusion is important, very particularly in a team working context. As an action group, we felt it was really important then that one of the modules should tackle the topic of language and banter head on. Now, what this module does not try to do is provide a list of things you can and cannot say. That would be doomed to failure from the start. What it does do is facilitate conversations within the teams that help to establish some ground rules and encourage people to challenge themselves and each other when something inappropriate is said. Indeed, one of the authors of this particular module will be joining the panel session afterwards if you'd like to know more or ask questions about this module. So here are the contents, which in summary are firstly that they look at the impact of language and words, and then go on to consider, well, how relevant is the location and the context to whether something that is said is appropriate or not. There's a reminder of the importance of the protected characteristics. And then this leads into a discussion, conversation around the pros and cons of banter in the workplace and within our teams. And really importantly, the final section looks at how do we challenge effectively. I, for one, want to see a culture where non-inclusive behaviour is challenged in a similar way to safety concerns. The workshop uses videos and 3 personae to help generate both self-reflection and group discussion. This helps delegates to discuss more openly, especially if they're uncomfortable with sharing personal information about themselves. In the next couple of slides, so just one of the personae used in the session. The purpose of the personae is to give a description of 3 different people from a diverse backgrounds, diverse characteristics, but to help give the delegates some context to help them consider and discuss whether certain language and banter is or is not appropriate. And you'll see here the description of one of these personae, Tyrone. And then in describing the persona, we go on to look at some of the things that might be said. And these are in the speech bubbles. And they are aimed very much at encouraging discussion between the team members. Just to be really clear though, whilst the module seeks to generate discussion around what is and what is not appropriate banter, it is very clear that any language that is, for example, racist or homophobic is not only unacceptable, it is illegal. So moving on to module 3, ways of working and flexibility. This is all about flexibility in our ways of working and encourages the team to consider how this can be made to work effectively for them. The module starts by highlighting the potential benefits of flexibility in terms of innovation, engagement, productivity, and market access. Delegates will hopefully identify others that are more specific to their team. And so the contents of the module are built around understanding what we mean by ways of working. This can cover when we work, where we work, how we work. For example, some people like working late into the evening, whilst others are far more effective working at the start of the day. Some people like detailed instructions to be given to them. Others a much vaguer outline. Some people don't like being disturbed, while others want to discuss regularly with colleagues what they're doing. Then goes on as a module to discuss 4 different work preferences, getting the team to understand where each of them would place themselves on the scale. And this is done in a very visual way, and certainly if more tricky when it's virtual, but when people are in a room, by going to stand somewhere along a line to indicate where they are. And this looks at, firstly, the sort of how people prefer to relate to one another. Do they get their energy from talking things through with others or working on their own? And that's the sort of the extrovert versus introvert. Then looking at how people prefer to gather and deal with information. Are they very practical in the way they do that? Or are they more creative? Then how do people prefer to make decisions? Do they do it based on their beliefs or gut feel? Or do they prefer to be much more analytical and use data and hard evidence? And finally, how people prefer to organise themselves and others. Do they like structure? Or do they prefer much more flexibility in how they approach their work and are organised? And as a team, you can discuss how individuals in the team fit on the different scales and work out what that means for how you can work together effectively. Because the final part of the module looks at how do we apply that understanding to become more effective as a team. And that will be different for every team, which is why we want to run these modules for teams, not for a series of random individuals who've come together just to receive this sort of piece of training. So moving on to the final workshop, and this is all around problem solving. And if you remember, that's one of the real features of the engineering culture. Here are the aims of the module and a summary of its content, which draws out the importance of diversity of thought, background and experiences in helping an engineering team to not only work together more effectively, but also to generate designs and solutions that are more inclusive. You will see that the module uses a quiz format to initiate discussions, and I'll give you some examples of those shortly. There then follows a theory, which is based around Ashby's law of requisite variety, which this evening I've not got time to explain, but you'll get to understand its relevance if you attend or run the workshop. And don't worry, there's a full explanation of what it is within the guidance notes. As with the other modules, there's an optional element, which, having run a pilot of this module myself, I highly recommend using. So I'm going to run through a couple of the questions we use in the module. I can't ask you to show your hands, but just think for yourself as I read this. Is this true or is this false? So the Euro NCAP, which is a new car assessment programme, processes include the assessment of car seat belts involving pregnant women shaped crash test dummies. So is that true or false? Give you a moment to think. Well, it's false. In fact, there is only one EU seat test that references a female dummy, regardless of whether they're pregnant or not. And indeed, that female dummy is only a smaller version of the male dummy, and they are only tested in the passenger seat. The whole idea that you could test a seatbelt or any other device based on a standard human dummy does not make sense to me. As designers, we surely need to think about our designs in the context of the rich diversity of humankind, with a variety of heights, shapes, weights, and a plethora of other characteristics. And as for the assumption that the female dummy should only be tested in the passenger seat, need I say more? Is anybody standard? Surely everyone is unique. Here's another question. Is it true there was an international company that developed a soap dispenser that only recognised white hands? Is that true or false? Again, I'll pause briefly so you can think of your answer. Well, this one's true. Indeed, it was highlighted by a black worker who tried to, who posted a video of himself, tried to use this soap dispenser. It had over 155,000 views, and actually it showed it simply did not recognise black hands. Two areas of concern this highlighted were that the light sensor was just simply not tested on a diversity of users, and it literally excluded users worldwide. And secondly, could you imagine the reputational risk for companies that use and create products that aren't tested with that diversity of user? Again, this challenges our approach to design and testing. Are we considering the diversity of people when doing our work and designing in a way that is inclusive? And a key lesson from this for me is to recognise that no one individual has all the answers. They can only ever design based on their understanding and experiences. How much more powerful then a team can be if it makes use of the diversity of its members, assuming of course that it is diverse in the first place. And to do that, it needs to be inclusive and ensure that everyone can contribute. Look, here are a few more questions for you to ponder. I'm not going to give you the answers now, but you might like to discuss them during the Q&A session later and test the panel on them. But that actually starts to bring me to the end of my presentation, which I hope you've enjoyed and found informative. During this, I've been through the background to why and how these 4 inclusive team working modules have been developed, giving you a taster of what they contain and the different learning approaches that they use. So, what next? Well, if you want to know more, then look out for the details as they're launched by the Royal Academy during National Inclusion Week at the end of September. And I'd really encourage you to make use of the modules. Remember, they're free to use. You can download them and use them in your organisations, promote them and encourage others to. And I can assure you, you'll have a great fun as well as learning together as a team. Get involved, use and promote them. And thank you so much for listening. Enjoy yourselves. Thank you.
This is the second tool we're presenting to this evening, and it's called the Majority Allies Toolkit. As David said earlier, this came out of the Creative Cultures report and its recommendations for action. So we didn't just analyse what engineers were saying, but we also kind of thought, well, here's a certain set of patterns and we want to challenge it. So this tool is already live and it's available to use. Before I go into some of the details of that tool, I kind of think it's always important to note a few things about more broadly. Firstly was to say thank you. Thank you to InterEngineering for inviting us and collaborating with us over the last few years. It's been really appreciated. And this also just reminded me as well, and I just didn't want to ignore it, but that Pride was born out of the need to act against repression and injustice. Some of the demonstrations I'd heard about prior, not that I was around, but I could have been, that there were prior to Stonewall uprising against a police raid, happened in the 50s and 60s, and there were actions against kind of injustice before that as well. I think it's important to be aware of, so we know what we face or that what we see other people facing, that we can possibly understand it and see how people have got there. I guess I don't need to tell you all about some of this, but I also just didn't want to ignore that as well. Briefly, what I'm going to be covering for part of this is who am I, an overview of the project tool, the project and its toolkit, a couple of insights from allies that we worked with, a link to the group itself, what the role of an ally is, and what your organisation can do to support Majority Allies. So who am I? This is less of a personal identity crisis, though, many of us have these recurring or ongoing, and, without making too late of it, I know that's also something really important and difficult for a lot of people and having to deal with that. And whether we're an imposter in our bodies or whether we feel imposters from our minds, they are complex things. And I know that for some of us, and I'd say for me, some of the time in COVID where I've been working from home, I've had a little bit of time to reflect on what I do, how I do it, and wanting to make a difference, because our time together is sometimes shorter than we imagine. And that we want things to be fairer, safer, and that life that we actually live to our full potential is lived and without the kind of mental and physical harm that we've experienced or that we witness around us. I am Arthur Dillon, Project Officer in the Diversity Inclusion team, and I work for the Royal Academy of Engineering. I'm going to cover the resource, but I'm also just going to acknowledge the fact that as well, this is also part of a development opportunity for me to speak. I generally avoid it because there are amazing people who speak really, really well, and I'll generally get them in, but occasionally I challenge myself and kind of put myself in the mix. I avoid it partly because I'm dyslexic, and that impacts on my cognitive processing and memory recall. So I'm like a 1980s computer, for those of you who were even born then, that can't always open more than one program at a time, and that can't always access the files that I might have even created myself, and then you find them that are in a bit of a jumble, so it's a bit frustrating. And that's a beep in the background just to acknowledge the frustration. And the other parts of me, kind of some of the positive things, I'll try and layer things together, and I'll raise questions rather than doing something out of routine. So bear with me, particularly in the Q&A around that. And the third kind of point around this I was going to just flag up was, like, more broadly, I'm representing the Academy, so I just wanted to note a couple of things that we're trying to do, particularly as we've got a new strategy that's out. And that strategy has D&I at the heart of it, which is that the UK has a world-leading, truly diverse and inclusive engineering workforce, that we are looking to mainstream D&I. It's not just a few of us who work in a particular department now and again, and we kind of do a few events here and there and try and make the change, but it is across the Academy's programmes, and it's within the processes that we operate, and that D&I is owned by the organisation. There's clear accountable goals and measures that we work to, and that we promote and embed D&I into the programmes and the engineering work as part of our core part of our strategic vision. A couple of things just to give you a little sprinkling of what we're up to more broadly, mainly relate to the D&I team. We're looking at whether there should be an accountability mechanism within engineering, and we'll be consulting with our industrial partners and more broadly across engineering on that. We'll be consulting on the next phase of the Graduate Engineering Engagement Programme, which is to increase the flow of diverse talent into engineering careers. We kept hearing about shortage of skills. However, there were a significant number of people who were studying engineering but not getting engineering jobs. So our research found that, and we've been running a programme now into its 6th year to change that. So we have 800 students who've gone through that programme, and we work with over a dozen engineering companies on that as well. So if you're interested in as a student about to graduate or recently graduated, the next event is the 19th to 21st of August. My details will be at the end of this, so you can get in touch or on our website as well. And companies who want to find a way of getting involved, find out about it, and possibly get involved next year, also get in touch with us. There's a lot of opportunities to work with us in a number of different ways, and we're keen to do that. They'll be reviewing a progression framework, and the Academy itself will be publishing our diversity data on the fellowship, grant applications and awardees, and we'll have that out publicly to have a look at, as well as our action plans to possibly change that. We also will continue work linked like this, which is working with external organisations and networks of engineers, such as InterEngineering and the Association for Black and Ethnic Minority Engineers, to be informed. See, someone else is cheering about this bit. Amplify and strategically collaborate to create an inclusive workforce so that we all feel safe and included as ourselves. We're going to promote tools like this, but go more in some occasions, more than just promote them. We're going to check whether they're going to be used, check what impact they're going to have. And if they're, if it's a bit duff, we'll move it along and hopefully learn from the process as well. And I guess just those are those things. And one of the reasons I mentioned the Association for Black and Ethnic Minority Engineers was to layer some of that together. I think we're all aware that the Black Lives Matter movement had re-emerged for the last couple of months, and which is essential. It was quite horrific what we saw and heard about again. And I think the reason I'm kind of flagged that up, obviously some people can be LGBT plus and from BAME background, and it will have resonated massively. And we will see, and hopefully in some of our workplaces, that things are being acknowledged about the fact that this isn't just an absolutely horrific situation and a set of incidences in the US, but there is a lot that's gone underneath and gone on for too long that hasn't been acknowledged or changed. And people are kind of saying, well, what about now? Why can't we change for the better in this period of our lives? So that we act as an ally, act in solidarity for common causes, and we step up. I've personally worked with the InterEngineering on a few occasions, so this is just a wee slide of us last year. We had quite a significant workforce outing, quite literally, of Academy LGBT plus engineers, workers and our links and allies. And this week we have taken part with yourselves on 2 events. So I'm speaking today, and then on Thursday, Alex will be speaking on some of our responses to COVID, how we've worked across engineering and some of the lessons learned around policy, or lessons that could be learned, should I say. Okay, so back to the allies. I go sideways often, but I know you're hopefully more to listen and take part in this. The Creative Cultures Report showed that LGB, not T, because we didn't have enough data for the T, so we're just being clear to say the LGB engineers felt up to 10% less included and around 35% less likely to be open about their sexual orientation. And those things, plus a number of other kind of statistics we kind of found out from a survey of thousands of engineers, led to that Creative Cultures Report, but also led to this tool, and the tool that people wanted to step up, but didn't quite know how to do that. And that within this, we were aware that we didn't have all the data for LGBT plus engineers, but we did have broad data that within the engineering workforce, the majority are male and white, and that it needs to be not just the ownership and the responsibility of the 12% women engineers or the 9% BAM engineers, that it could be the responsibility and ownership of all engineers, and the majority in some cases are the white engineers, and we'd like more of those to be involved in this process. The project itself was led by the fantastic ReEng Martin, so thank you, Lorraine, if you get to watch this, and I'll flag this up at some point soon. Coordinated with us with an industry action group, and that included Network Rail, Airbus, Wood, National Grid, KBR, WSP, Roke, McDonald, Arcadis, and Rolls-Royce, who work with us. So thanks to all of those who've been involved in it, and I think doing some of the Allies programmes in their workplaces as well. So coming back to what is a majority ally, I've obviously referred to this without talking about it in detail. The definition here is what we put on the website: a person who actively promotes and has a passion for diversity and inclusion, supports those who may be different to themselves, and stands up to actively combat barriers. And then majority, where we've not analysed it, but written it up here, the diversity groups representing a notable majority of a given characteristic. Now that might sound a bit scientific. So basically, as I said, you could be white, an LGBT, and be a majority ally in relationship to race, gender, or disability. Or as ReEng says in the video, which you'll see later, you can be of one characteristic, but you might be stepping in as an ally for another. And that will kind of be explored in this in the videos coming up. So before I introduce them, the next two, there'll be two short videos, one from ReEng Martins, who was the industry chair for this project, and then Mark Sutcliffe from KBR. About 5 minutes, so I'm just going to let you watch those back to back.
I think anybody can be an ally. I think you have to have certain attributes, which is about being open, which is about exhibiting empathy, which is about encouraging others, and also being prepared to challenge either policies or processes or behaviour that is contrary to having a diverse and inclusive environment. I'm an active ally for disabled employees at Network Rail, and what this means is that I make sure that what we do supports both their access to training opportunities, access to different services, make sure that our policies are correct, and on occasion represent their views if they are not available. I think that the organisation has changed in a number of ways through having allies like myself. It considers disability much more proactively. Our capacity to meet the needs of disabled employees and disabled passengers is increasing. We are mindful of and sensitised to the experience of disabled people, and we use that to inform our approach to our passengers as well as to our employees and to our potential employees. In my experience as an ally, I think what works is being or having a sense of humility. So an ally isn't expected to be the font of all knowledge. You are expected really to be open to and supportive of the needs of the individual that you're supporting. I think allies ought to be courageous. So there's no point in being an ally and kind of being invisible. I think if you're an ally, people ought to recognise you as such, and that means that you sometimes have to ask some challenging questions of others. You might well have to make representations on behalf of somebody, and so therefore you need an element of boldness and bravery.
I got in the lift, and I was in the lift with two male engineers, And we're in the lift, and they said, "Oh, this Aspire Women's Network, what's that all about?" And said, they said, "Where's the men's club then?" And I said, turned around to them and said, "Well, you're in it." I think my job as an ally is to promote gender diversity throughout the organisation. We do have a lot of male engineers where we work. We want to get more female engineers into KBR, we want to get more female leaders, and my role is to promote gender diversity and to help women to progress up the leadership chain. We launched the Aspire Women's Leadership Network about 18 months ago, and since then the profile of that employee working group has increased massively. We've also run courses on unconscious bias, we've run courses on interviewing and reviewing CVs. We've done some surveys on people about when they leave work for and then come back, so for example for maternity or paternity, or if they have a medical, so how can we give them a soft landing when they come back to work, and how can we understand perhaps what their needs are. I get a lot of pride in doing what I do. I get a lot of satisfaction out of seeing people moving up the chain of promotion. I also get a sense of pride in seeing more people just generally get the message about what Allies stand for and around gender diversity and getting more women into engineering.
Hope you found those videos kind of engaging and kind of brought to life what people try and do in their workplaces. There's 6 films altogether on the website, and there's a variety, so have a little look and things might be drawn to you or people you work with, and I hope you find them useful. We are aware that there's a few gaps in terms of what they cover, but they were a starter, and hopefully we'll develop more, or we'll work with you to develop more in the future. Right, so what are the qualities of Majority Ally? On this slide, I've put this is from the website, and it's quite a lot of detail. I'm not going to read this out, but I am conscious that people with a visual impairment won't necessarily be looking at this at the moment and relying on me to speak about it. So I'm going to talk about it broadly. And if you want to see more of the detail and hear more of the detail, you might want to go back to the website with some audio function around that. I just didn't want to kind of keep talking to people, but just to give you a broad sort of sense about it. This is a definition of some of the qualities an ally could have, whether it's open to difference, respectful, or approachable. And we generally know someone who is like this, or sometimes begin to recognise in ourselves. So just have a little think about those kind of in terms of the qualities. And then the team also wanted to put down what an ally isn't. You're not expected to be HR or provide legal advice. I know some things kind of might end up potentially going down that way, but that's not what you're expected to do. So just be aware of boundaries. Boundaries are really important because sometimes some of the things people are going through are really, really tough. And you can be there, but you are not expected to be a counsellor or a mental health first aider. But you hopefully will kind of have some of those links in your workplace or networks, and they're important to have and be able to safely flag those up for people as well. And then we've also got a long list of attributes of a Majority Ally. Again, I'm not going to read out all of these, but they've come under 4 kind of broad areas around respect, flexibility, personality, and leadership. And I guess with leadership, sometimes a lot of us will switch off and go, we're not senior, we're not a manager, we're not this, we're not these people. And I just kind of encourage people to think about the fact that you're all different types of levels, pay grades in your organisation, in your life, but you can make a difference, and people do. Action, whatever action is infectious. And I would encourage you to take those actions. Things can positively snowball as well. And those who are leaders who maybe have got a bit tired or kind of into a routine pattern of what they talk about, maybe step back. If you're kind of tired of doing it, think about whether there's other people who've got a bit of passion or energy to do it, or kind of give them some of the platform, because sometimes we can hear when people are just going through the motion and things aren't changing when there is a real opportunity for things to change. So that's my personal view about some of that. More broadly, what can your company do to support allies? So that's, whether you're in a position to do that, whether you can bring this tool to your organisation and go, we haven't used any of these things. I was wondering if this is something we can do. And what we've done is put a bit of a list of what the company can do on this page. I won't read out all of it again, but broadly speaking, this comes down to budget, commitment and time. And I would add, which I think is probably not as explicit in here, but also training, like just a basic workshop. You don't need a big external trainer to do it, to start this process off, but, give it some proper commitment and time. And I think it would help move from the knowledge that this is a good idea to the practice. And I think practice in a safe space is important, because then when things do happen, you've tested out or you've considered a number of options around that. And also, that conversation is ongoing within your organisation. We did a workshop in our annual event of a couple of scenarios that we worked through with incredibly senior people, to HR workers, to quite a range of workers in engineering. And we put down just simple things from you over here, maybe me. Someone said to me, "Oh, you're the only one in. Are you holding up the fort, are you?" It looks like around me that there's no one in the office except for me. My colleague got up 3 hours earlier than I did. People wouldn't know necessarily, because they weren't sat in the office. How might I intervene if I felt that that was something I wanted to do? Or how might someone senior hearing those comments, passing through the office or through emails and sees that, what could you do? I just thought we use that as a discussion point. And I think it's important to kind of go, what would you do? How do you kind of send a message in a short-term way, but also in a long-term way as well? Another example that we put was, you're on probation, but you notice a senior manager constantly raising their voice at another colleague. They're rarely speaking and it's making you uncomfortable, but you don't quite know what to do. So this is acknowledging the fact we might be in different situations in our contract. We might be zero contract workers or just contracted in. How might we deal with this? I use this particular example. It's probably slightly more obvious for some people in terms of this might give clues to a microaggression, which might be actually a pattern of bullying and harassment. But I think sometimes people won't necessarily acknowledge this. And even if you, at a private point, sort of make a suggestion to speak to that person, the person who's been, and just checking if they're all right, or what do you do? And I think it's important to have those conversations rather than we give suggestions on what they are at the moment. So I think it was a really, really good workshop that was run, and we got some really good kind of insight on what people would or wouldn't do. Or the fact that what was even more insightful and actually quite inspiring was people had stepped in on a number of occasions, and they'd stepped in, they'd changed something happening, and that was even more positive rather than kind of just going, oh, well, this is how it is, or this is how people always behave. They always behave. You know, we can look at the news every day and look at the always behave and what people have got away with. They don't need to get away with it anymore. We can have quite a different life in the future. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening to me, putting up with me as well. I was going to say, but I will say it because that's how I speak. I hope some of that was useful. And I hope I'm able to answer some of the questions and comments that come from today. If I can't answer them directly, I will follow them up and send them through the InterEngineering email. They'll probably do some kind of survey analysis. And thanks for the invitation. And I'll just end with a little wee picture that our team across the academy did as part of our Pride flag. You might notice the colours in there that we shared as I can acknowledge that Pride was going on, but we were also down and we were in lockdown. And I know visibility, particularly for LGBT plus engineers and LGBT plus activists, is really important. So that was just a little something that we tried to do. Thank you.